Liz Reyer is Eagan's newly elected representative in the legislature. She won the open seat this fall and joins us now to talk about what's next. Liz, welcome to the program and congratulations on the election.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today.
Good to have you here. Now, this is your first elective office, but it's not the first campaign you've been involved in. Why did you decide to be the candidate this time around?
It really was an intersection of need and opportunity from a community perspective as I saw it. I was working on another campaign when this opportunity came along, and I was reached out to by people in the DFL, including Lori Halverson herself, our current representative, to consider taking the seat. From my point of view, my professional background, my background as an activist, and my ability to get things done all seem to line up with the just a strong yes on moving forward.
Now, everybody is focused on COVID-19, and appropriately so. That's probably one of the first things that the legislature is going to talk about when you enter office in January. We have a litany of things that we have to deal with there, everything from how do we deal with the public health crisis to how do we get the vaccine to people when it becomes available, and how do we deal with the economic impact it's having on things. Tell me about what your priorities are and what you would like to see happen there.
It's a good question, and I think that from my point of view, COVID and the challenges it poses also give us some opportunities in a number of ways. First of all, we have to address the short-term issues related to COVID. From a health perspective, I think about that from the perspective of making sure that patients and potential patients have access to everything they need, from testing to care, to access to care, services for other types of health conditions. But I also want to speak to the needs of attending to the short-term needs of COVID for the healthcare workers, ensuring sufficient PPE, doing what we can with staffing, and also honoring the need to be staying home, wearing our masks, distancing, so that we do all we can as individuals and as a community to help manage the crisis. Longer term for healthcare, I think that we need to be looking at it as a basic human right and thinking about as a society what we should do. But for now, I think we need to get across the hump of COVID. From an economic perspective, clearly there's an urgent need that we see across our community for people to have support. We need federal support to help people be able to weather the job loss, to be able to weather the furloughs, and to be able to keep a roof over their head and food on their table. And so from that point of view, I think we need to do that, but then also look at, again, changing our industries so that we are developing sustainable jobs that help address long-term structural issues across the state. So there are good union jobs in new emerging industries that can help people move forward and help us have a clean and sustainable environment.
Now, you talk about structural issues, and I think that's one thing that COVID-19 has just made more apparent is it's unmasked a lot of the problems that we have underlying, everything from healthcare to racial inequality. You've talked a lot about that during the campaign. How do you plan to move your agenda forward in that area?
To me, there's two ways that we think about that. I think it's very common to think about it in terms of the policies themselves and the actions that are taken. That we need to, of course, address the disparities in healthcare outcomes amongst communities, from between the Black community and the white community, for example, the Indigenous community, all other groups, to make sure that we are achieving equitable outcomes. What I advocate for is that we also need to be looking at the processes. We cannot, as a majority culture, understand the lived experience of all groups and be able to say, here's how the problem is best defined, and here are all the possible solutions and the ways that we could address that. But we can do that by making sure and inviting and actively including people across communities in Eagan and statewide to have all voices at the table and the access to the discussion open up. And so to me, it's both policy and process. And that's what I'm working on as I prepare for going into session, is building those bridges. I started that during the campaign. I started before the campaign, really. But in continuing that work so that it is all, it's continuous and we can make progress policy and process-wise.
So one of the processes that you have to deal with, obviously, is in the way that we make policy and the way that we do the legislature, is that you have one party has the majority in the Senate, and another has the majority in the House. And because of the polarization we have seen over the last, well, going back even a decade or more, it's become harder to do things. And so you've had to bring people together before on things. How are we going to bring people together at the legislative level to come up with solutions that can ultimately get passed and signed by the governor?
As in all things, there's an aspect of trust building that I think is essential in relationship building. Coming in as a new person, I feel that it's incumbent on me to be making a great deal of effort to make connections. For example, in our new legislator training that we've been doing the last couple of weeks, I'm happy to say it's been across caucuses. It's been both DFL and Republican new legislators together, and taking advantage of those opportunities to say, let's know each other. Let's spend time reaching out individually. That's my approach as a person, as a professional, and will be as a legislator, is to make contact and seek individual relationships. It's also advice that I've gotten from other legislators who I respect, is to find people with whom you can have genuine, trusting, respectful friendships across the aisle, and then be able to build on that. I'm good at finding common ground with people. I'm committed to doing that and to holding on to my policy values, of course, but looking for the places where we can start to build bit by bit to move forward. I think we all have the interest of the state at heart, and so we need to find ways, again, piece by piece, that we can come together.
COVID-19 has obviously just dominated what we're talking about. It frames practically every issue that we're looking at these days. But there are many other issues that are still out there and still need to be dealt with. One of them is climate change. The scientists will tell us the clock is ticking. Action has to be taken on a global level, but also on a local level. What are you looking that can be done?
There are a couple things. One, I think that this might not sound like it's answering your question, but it's a prerequisite, is that we deal with the inconsistent access to broadband and robust internet statewide. When we do that, one of the issues that we face in our state is that we don't have jobs everywhere where they're needed. And so some communities are more dependent on individual specific industries. Some don't have any at all and see brain drain of their youth to the cities. I think that with expanding that, then we can look at building jobs that are sustainable. And here's where I come back to climate change, is that we make it economically viable for people to be working in green industries. I think we're seeing from COVID that transportation is something that we can affect. We're seeing the need to do less commuting, and we're seeing the impact of that on air quality. What if we continue to break the commuting culture and find ways to form relationships among people, coworkers, people and their clients, and so that we can reduce the need to be in our cars, find ways that we can do those things, and commit as a governing unit and as a community that we believe in the science and that we are committed to changing things that we can change in order to leave the planet in good shape for future generations.
We've been speaking with Liz Reyer. She is Eagan's newly elected representative and will be sworn in at the legislature in the House in January. Liz, we certainly appreciate your time and want to stay in contact with you as the legislature session progresses. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure.